In this video, we're going to walk through the Microsoft Lab about managing virtual machines using the Azure CLI. Now, the Azure CLI is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to with regards to working in Azure in other ways. The CLI, specifically a command line interface, is a way to be able to do everything you've done in Azure, except using a command line instead of the graphical user interface that you might be used to. So let's see, we can go ahead and, this is again from the Microsoft Learn site, and let's go ahead and get started here. Oh, for some reason it went to step number 9. Okay, so the Azure CLI, quite common for people to start using the CLI instead of the graphical user interface. So we are used to the Azure CLI. This uses the Azure Cloud Shell, which is quite helpful, especially when you're trying to automate a lot of tasks and do a lot of things all together. Now this lab, it starts us off with creating a virtual machine. I'll go ahead and activate the sandbox. If you haven't seen this environment before, this is kind of a split environment. On the left-hand side, we have the instructions. On the right-hand side, we have the Azure Cloud Shell, where we can type in the various commands. Once this creates the sandbox for me, this Cloud Shell should open up. I have seen it a few times in the past where that Cloud Shell doesn't quite open up. It gives me some sort of an error message. Oftentimes, simply refreshing the entire web page will fix it for me. Requesting Cloud Shell should be coming up here in just a second. All right, so let's see. It starts talking about the login, subscriptions, resource groups. This is all the general stuff that you have to have when you're working with Azure. You have to have a login, so you have to have an account in order to get in there. You have to have a subscription or somebody who's paying for it. And then you have to have a resource group which provides you permissions to specific resources. Let's see, so I've got 1 hour, great. And so we need all that with the graphical user interface, and we need the same thing with the CLI. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a Linux virtual machine with the CLI. I think the reason why we're doing this with Linux is just because it's so quick, as opposed to a Windows machine, which takes a little bit longer. See, first off, there are some VM commands, VM, virtual machine type commands that we'll be using. In there, some of those sub commands are create, deallocate, delete, open port, and so on. It's not all of them. We can go ahead and click on this list to get the full list, and I'm pretty sure that full list is going to be huge. So we're going to be using the command azvm create. I personally like to read these from the right to the left. So we are going to create. What are we creating? We're creating a virtual machine. Where are we creating it? Well, we're creating it in Azure. Once you start reading these right to left, it really leaves nothing to the imagination as far as what these commands are doing. So let's see, along with that, there are some parameters that we'll have to specify. We will have to specify a resource group. We'll have to specify a name for the virtual machine. We'll have to specify what image we're coming from or what image we want to deploy. This would be our Linux or our Windows image. And then the location of where we want to deploy this machine. Tells me there's also a verbose flag, which you can throw in as well to get more information back. All right, so here we go. Our very first command, creating the VM. It says, yeah, we're going to create a Linux machine running Ubuntu in the West US location. And we can see right here is the whole command. Again, create virtual machine in Azure. The backslash here is a way of having all of this run onto multiple lines. This is actually kind of a Linux thing. If I open up Notepad and I paste this in here, that is the same as that. So the backslashes basically allow me to run multiple lines together as one. You can do it as one big, huge, long line. This is wrapping due to Notepad. You can have it as one big long line, just copy and paste, or you can copy and paste this whole thing in there. It's exactly the same. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Copy and then paste and enter. All right, so we're creating a virtual machine. We're putting it in this resource group. We're putting it in the West US location, or the West US data center. We're going to name this VM sample VM. The type of image or the operating system it's coming from is going to be the Ubuntu LTS. It's going to create an admin user called Azure user, and it's going to generate some SSH keys in order for us to log in easily. Beyond that, we will then do a verbose installation. So this will give us quite a bit of information back when it's done. All right, so all done. It says it created some SSH keys for me. That's great. If you're not familiar with SSH keys, basically it allows a passwordless login to a Linux machine. Really secure, really easy way to be able to log into machines. A lot easier than working with passwords. When it's done, it spits out this JSON type data right down here, which tells me what the fully qualified domain name is. Doesn't have one. That's interesting. What the ID of the machine is, the location, the MAC address, state, its IP, public IP, and so on. If I'm not entirely sure about what's going on, if I don't fully trust this, I can actually go into the Azure portal and log in and select my subscription. And I will actually see that virtual machine in here. Let's see, under all resources, storage count, network security groups, scroll down, and right there is my sample VM virtual machine. So it did create it. If you're curious, yep, the path or the IP address looks exactly the same, virtual network name, it's all exactly the same. Great. So right there, I may have saved myself a couple of minutes of typing. For instance, if I did this through the GUI, that could take a minute or two of going through the graphical user interface. As opposed to if I do this a lot, I could have just simply copied and pasted this line in there and created it at with pretty much one click. Let's see, creates a new VM. Yep, we just talked about that. Generate SSH keys. Yep. Spit out some JSON data. And then next, test it. All right, so this lab is about managing the VM, not just about creating it. So now that we've started, let's go ahead and create it. I'm sorry, manage it. All right, so let's go ahead and use SSH. So it tells me right here, go ahead and call SSH user or SSH with the Azure user at, and then I notice I have these less than, greater than public IP. That means I have to replace that with whatever the public IP address is. So if I was to copy this into Notepad, make that a little bit bigger to read. What I want to do is I want to replace everything that's including the less than, greater than. So I want to erase that. Look over here at my JSON data and type and get the IP address. So that's 40.112.190.117, excuse me. I'll copy that and then paste it on in and hit enter. SSH tries to be secure, says, hey, you've never logged into this host before. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes. And then logs me on in. See from the output here, welcome to Ubuntu 18.04 LTS. Gives me a little bit of information about the machine, what the load is, memory usage, disk space, and so on. Yay! So we made the machine and then we logged on into it. Awesome. Let's see. What I want to do is now that I've logged in, now that I've confirmed I was able to log in, I can go ahead and type exit or log out, because because I want to get out of this machine. If you're not sure which machine you're on, you can look right down here in the prompt. It says, hey, you're currently logged in as Azure user, and you're currently on the machine called sample VM. So I'll go ahead and type exit, and we'll notice that the prompt changes to my name at Azure. So it tells me I'm back at Azure. So we go on to the next page. We can start talking about other virtual machine images. Let's go ahead and copy and paste this line in here. So we created this virtual machine using the Ubuntu VM. In fact, for this particular command, I'm going to come over here to the Azure portal. I'm going to open up this Cloud Shell from here, just because it's a little bit wider and this content will be easier to read. So if I go and paste that in there now, the Azvm image list. Again, if we read this from the right to the left, we want to get a list of all the images of VMs in Azure. And then we want to output that in a table format or kind of a grid format. That's much easier to read. All right, so what offer is it? Well, CentOS, Debian, OpenSUSE, RHEL, SLES, Ubuntu, Windows, and so on. Who's the publisher? OpenLogic, Debian, Red Hat, Windows. What's the specific SKU or specific version? Well, 7.5, stable, 1804 LTS, 2019 data center. What's the URN? Not fully sure what the URN actually stands for, but then we have the URN alias. And this is the name we would actually choose. For instance, if we said Ubuntu LTS, then this would actually return back an Ubuntu machine running version 1804 LTS. If we said Win 2019 Data Center, then that would return back a Windows Server 2019 Data Center from Microsoft. All right, so the Azvm image list command, again, makes kind of sense as you start reading it from the right to the left. It gets a list of all the OS images for virtual machines in Azure. Now, that's not actually a list of all the virtual machines. We can, as we see here, add a --all option towards the end. And if I do that, then we are going to get a huge, was it --all? --all. We're going to get a huge list, which is way huge. In fact, it says this could take more than a minute. So I will probably cancel that before we keep going forward. But along with that, we can also limit down what we want as far as that all. For instance, here's another example. Azvm image list. Again, get a list of all the images of virtual machines. Looking specifically for WordPress. And then we want all. So if I copy that, cancel this. Ooh, I don't think it wants to let me cancel. All right, I'm gonna have to run it through this one. Cross my fingers that the one window is not interfering with the other. It probably is. Yeah. All right, so what I'm doing here in the Cloud Shell is probably messing with what I'm doing here in this Cloud Shell. Yes, reconnect. So I'll start over and hopefully that will fix the problem. Maybe. Okay, so what we're going to do here is with regards to these two commands, basically in this case, I'm going to be filtering based on WordPress. So we're going to be looking through all the manufacturers, all the products, everything, and just show WordPress. And then down here, it's the same thing with the publisher of being Microsoft, just because we want to see all the stuff available by Microsoft. So here's our WordPress list. Still taking his own sweet time. And then also the Microsoft list, which will also take its own sweet time. Normally I would be waiting for these, but seeing as how I previously had done something weird with the Azure Cloud Shell that's probably causing it to slow down, I'm not necessarily going to wait for that. All right, location-specific images. Now there's going to be different images that are available throughout the US or throughout the world. Some of the more obvious things you might think of as far as location specifics are going to be language specific items. For instance, will a Swahili-based Windows server, Swahili language Windows server be available in Denmark? Maybe, maybe not. And therefore, different locations will have different images available to them just to optimize their locations. All right, so very briefly, yeah, there's all the Microsoft defined ones. WordPress is still going. All right. So we'll go ahead and we will try the Azure, Azure VM image list. This time only looking for the images that are on the East US. Now what's in the East US versus the West US probably is going to be the same in a lot of cases, unless you have custom images that you have pushed up there. Let's see, they're suggesting do a couple of others such as Japan East. Is this guy? That guy still never finished. Well, let's try. So have East US. Let's try Brazil South. Now, unfortunately, that list is kind of hard to read over here on the right-hand side. Therefore, it may not be fully accessible to me to be able to identify what's changed. But there may be, if I scroll up here, there may be differences between what's in Brazil South and what's in East US. Especially, like I was starting to say, if I created my own images that I wanted to deploy multiple times, those images may only be available in certain regions. All right, next one, let's talk about sizing virtual machines. So when we build out virtual machines, we specify a size. All right, it did finally finish. When we created this VM right here, our sample VM, sample VM, I don't believe we told it a size. I don't recall, but it created it as a standard DS1 version 2. That may or may not be the size we want. That gives us 1 virtual CPU and 3.5 gigs of memory. What if we wanted to size that up or size it down? Well, first off, we need to know what sizes are available to us. So predefined window sizes, yes. Read through there. There's lots of information about the types, the classifications of machines, and so on. But maybe we want to see which sizes are available to us. Let me copy that. Come back to our window here and paste. While this is, wow, that went quick. All right. Up arrow, show this. So what this command is doing, again, read it from right to left. It's going to list the sizes. List the sizes of what? Well, it's going to list the sizes of the virtual machines. Which virtual machines? The virtual machines in Azure. Oh, okay. Then we can get more specific. Specifically, we want the location of the sizes of the virtual machines in the East US, and then output it in a table. And then we can go ahead and we can see the various sizes that there are. Wow, there's a lot of options there. With regards to how many disks they can handle, how much memory they have, what the name is, or the SKU for that VM size, number of CPU cores, OS disk, and then resource disk possible sizes. So these are all the various sizes. This would be important to know because not every size is available in every region. Yes, different sizes are available in different region. So therefore, if you wanted, for instance, the standard B1LS everywhere around the world, that may not be available everywhere around the world. So it's helpful to be able to find out which resources are available where. Yeah, abbreviated response. Okay. When we create the virtual machine, actually, yeah, let's go ahead and run this guy. I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in. When we create the virtual machine, we can specify with this size option. Standard DS5 V2. Now we got a whole bunch of red over here. And if we look through the red error message, it will probably tell us a little bit about what's happening. Let's see, Azure error invalid template deployment. Template failed because of policy violation. Please see details for more information. And it says request is disallowed by policy. Oh, there's a policy somewhere that is blocking me from accessing this virtual machine or from creating this virtual machine. Now, if we go back and we look at our other window, let's look at that DS5 V2. Let's see if we can find that. DS12, 13, 14. I don't see a DS5. Let's see, D5. Was it D or was it DS? DS5. D5. All right, I don't see it at first glance. Oh, DS4. All right, I don't see it at first glance. However, I do know that if we read through the instructions here, it tells us a little bit more. Specifically, your subscription has some limits assigned to it. Specifically, the fact that you can only create 4 virtual CPUs. Okay. I believe that DS5 was something like 20 virtual CPUs. I'm actually really curious. Copy, paste. There we go. DS5, 16 CPUs. So our free tier environment is capped at 4. We just asked it for 16 plus the original 1 that was already there. So we asked it for a total of 17, and the error message said, no, I'm not going to let you do that. Let's see, that says quota exceeded error. I don't necessarily read in here quota exceeded. I just see policy violation. Yeah. All right, so that was trying to create a new machine with a specific size. We probably would want to specify the size in the future using the --size option so that we're consistent on what we're creating as opposed to just whatever the standard is at that point. We can, however, resize the virtual machine. For instance, the machine we created, we said was only 1 CPU with 3.5 gigs of RAM. Well, we can resize it. We can actually make it bigger or smaller depending on what we want. So let's go ahead and run this command here. And again, if we read this backwards, list VM resize options. So list the resize options for virtual machines in Azure. Specifically, look in this resource group and look for the virtual machine sample VM. So it's going to list the resize options for sample VM in that resource group. And in this case, it looks extremely similar to the prior command we ran, basically saying, yes, this machine can be resized to all of these various options. Now, if I change some of the options on that virtual machine, such as the number of CPUs on it, or the number of hard drives or disks that are attached to it, or load balancing, some of these options, or some of these virtual machine sizes, such as the standard B1LS, would go away, would stop showing up in this list because it's no longer an option once I started needing multiple cores or multiple disks. See, multiple data disk count. Right here it's 2. If I started putting 4 in my environment, then anything here that lists 2 would no longer show up in the argument list. To resize, use the VM resize command. So right there, resize virtual machine in Azure. Let's go ahead and copy this and let's try it right here. So we're going to take this from the, what size did we say it is right now? Currently the DS1 V2, and we're saying take it to a DS2 V3. So that will take a couple of minutes. See, the instructions say it will bump it up to 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. So from 1 by 3.5, now going to 2 by 8. When it's done, we should get some nice JSON data telling us about the configuration. And there we go. So JSON data right here. This will tell us, more about, hey, what your storage is, what your OS disk is, and so on. All right. Querying the system and runtime about info. All right. Well, first off, which virtual machines do we have again? Do we have 1? Do we have 10? Well, let's go ahead and run that. Paste. And again, if we read this from the right to the left, we want to list. What do we want to list? We want to list all the virtual machines. Where? In Azure. All right. In this case, we only have 1 virtual machine. Oh, that's kind of ugly. Let's do it through here. Azvm list. We only have 1 machine. In this case, wow, that's a lot of output. Therefore, it gives us a lot of details about it, as opposed to the table format we were seeing up above, because we didn't tell it to give it to us in a table format. What was that? -- format. Output table. That's what I'm looking for. Hopefully, there we go. That's a little bit easier. Yeah, okay, which VMs do we have? Well, we just have the 1. It's a great way to be able to find out which VMs we have, though. This does tell us, yes, you can filter this down. You can start doing by resource groups or by names or other items. Oh, and there's the command I just tried to create. Output it as a table. Let's try getting the IP addresses. Again, if we read this from right to left, go ahead and list the IP addresses. Okay, IP addresses of what? Well, of the virtual machines in Azure. We specifically say only show that for the sample VM, and then output that into a table format. And we can see very easily, there's my public IP and there's my private IP. That's kind of handy. Let's get some more details about the VM. Sure. So again, read this right to left. We're going to show virtual machine in Azure, specifically looking in a resource group, and then specifically looking for this specific machine. This will look similar to what we saw up above. It is a whole bunch of JSON data. Ooh, that's a lot of JSON data. All the way down there. First thing I recognize there that's actually of use is the VM size. Now, if I had some sort of a script that was capable of reading JSON, then I could actually run the output of this into that script and actually make some nice sense out of it. Have a nice little report that I could share with my boss showing all the virtual machines in our environment and the various configurations. However, at first glance, that's a lot of detail. There's a lot of data in there. So we might want to filter it. We might want to limit that data down using this JMES path. See a JavaScript JMES path. I'm not sure what JMES is, but the path helps us find specific components in the environment or in the JSON data. For instance, here's a list right here. We've got a JSON output, basically a list of people. We've got their names and their ages. So Fred, Barney, and Wilma. Not sure where Betty is, but that's fine. We can then use the JMES path utilizing people square bracket 1 close square bracket, which then returns back, right, not the first person. So the first person would actually be number 0, but the second person, which is number 1, which is Barney. Okay. We can also add in some queries such as only show me people who are greater than 25, which then limits out who's there. As well as only show me the names of the people who are greater than 25. All right, so JMES query, lots of great power. Kind of questionable about what we're doing with this, but now we can actually start looking into more details about it. For instance, see, we just ran the Azvm show resource group and name. So Azvm show resource group and name. And now we can add in a query option, which will return specific information utilizing that JMES path notations we were seeing up above. I'm actually going to copy this and just paste it right on the back of my line. So that line I did an up arrow to show the prior command, and then I just add the query to the end. And so we'll rerun the query and then filter it out. Or I'm sorry, rerun the command and then filter it out to just that information right there. And I get back, oh, the admin name was Azure user. Oh, yeah. I can do other information such as the hardware profile size. I'll copy paste as opposed to manually editing it. Oh, that's a standard DSV too. That's kind of handy. What about the network information? Well, there's the NIC that I'm connected to, and I can get a little bit more detail about the system right there. All right, the JMES path stuff is very, very handy, although it takes a little while to understand how it works. So if you don't fully understand it right now, that's perfectly fine. You'll start to get more used to it as you go along. All right, stopping a VM. Let's go ahead and run this. Again, if we read this from right to left, we are going to stop a virtual machine in Azure, specifically sample VM in this resource group. It says, you know what, we're gonna stop this. We're gonna power off this VM, but we're going to keep billing it for it because we're only stopping the operating system. We're not actually deallocating it. To deallocate this VM, run Azvm deallocate instead. If I come back up to the Azure portal, and we'll look in the environment, let's see, refresh this. For the sample VM, the status right here just changed to stop. It's not stopped deallocated, it is just stopped. So there we go. We stopped the virtual machine. That's kind of cool. We shut down the operating system. Let's see, we can then run this get instance view. What does that tell us? It's going to tell us VM is stopped. All right, so again, get instance view. I'm not really sure off the top of my head what get instance view means. Has something to do with getting a view, getting information about an instance. An instance of what? Well, that instance would be a virtual machine in Azure. Specifically, again, sample VM against this resource group, and then we are querying or filtering specifically power state. Oh, okay. So we're getting the power state of the virtual machine. this command, all right, this is one of the ones that doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense, but all the rest so far have been pretty obvious. All right, so we stopped it. Let's go ahead and paste it. Start it. We did an Azvm stop to stop the VM. Now we do an Azvm start to start the VM. And back into the Azure portal, refresh, we see, oh yeah, it's running. It's good. Ah, perfect. See, then if I do an up arrow twice, let's go back up to that get instance view command. I should see the VM running. Ah, hey, that's kind of cool. Maybe I set my VMs to turn off every single day at 6 p.m. because I don't want to keep running these machines or running these instances when nobody's in the office. I then have a process that goes ahead and starts these VMs every day at 8 a.m. using the Azure CLI. That's kind of cool. I could actually turn on like 1,000 virtual machines all with one copy paste from a clipboard. That's kind of handy. Finally, restarting the VM. Well, there's a VM restart. So if you took the same command up here, instead of Azvm start, you did an Azvm restart. Well, that would shut down the OS and then start it back up. It also tells me, hey, you know what? There's this no wait flag. So before, when I did this Azvm start or the Azvm stop, it kind of hung for a minute before it finished and told me everything was done. If I add in this -- no wait flag, that means just do it and don't wait. Don't wait to come back to tell me it worked. Just do it and finish. So again, if I had like 1,000 virtual machines I needed to power on, I might start throwing that no wait flag in just so I don't have to wait for VM1 to power on before I start turning on VM2. All right, and then lastly, let's talk about installing some software on our virtual machine. So now there's a couple of different ways I can start installing software on here. First one is I can log into the virtual machine manually and install the software. Second option is to kind of use some of the Azure functions itself. Ooh, I spoke too soon. This one has me log in. All right, step number one, we need to find the IP address. So Azvm list IP addresses. List the IP address for sample VM. All right, let's go and run that. This will get me the public IP address because we need to connect into it. We're then going to do SSH in, similar to what we saw before. We've got the less than, greater than here. That means replace this with some information, which is going to be the public IP address. So I'm just going to go ahead and type this. SSH Azure user at 40.112.190.177. It already has the SSH key set up, so it logs me right in without asking for a password. And then we'll run this command. If you're not super familiar with it, it's doing an apt-get update, which means update your catalog to find what kind of software you can install. And then it does an apt-get install with the Nginx component. So we'll install the Nginx component on this server automatically. When it's done, let's exit. All right. At this point, we should be able to maybe access it. We can use the curl command. So curl -m10. Not sure what the M10 is, with the public IP address, 40.112.190.177, and this will time out. In fact, if I take that IP address right there, copy it, and I go into a web browser and I paste that in, it's going to time out as well. Now you may be asking yourself, we just installed Nginx. Nginx is a web server. why can't I access the web server on this machine? Well, connection timed out. It turns out there's a firewall. Oh, yeah, there's an Azure firewall which is protecting this machine by default. So what we need to do is we need to open up a port on that firewall, which is this next command. Again, if we read it backwards, open the port to the virtual machine in Azure, specifically port 80. Oh, all right. Let's go and run that. Now, one thing I've known from these, or that I've learned from the Azure firewall rules, they can take a minute or two before they're finally applied. Therefore, we can't immediately start expecting this to work. Even though it returned pretty quickly, if I try that curl command, again, just up arrow on my keyboard a couple of times. If I rerun that curl command, it may or may not work the first time. I may have to wait a moment. Same thing here, reload. Yeah, it's going to take a moment. The firewall rules take a moment or two for them to start responding. And it's saying, yep, pretty soon we should start getting some responses. Before I waste too much time, let me actually look through that response there, make sure that there was no errors. Ooh, that was a lot of text. I'm told it to open the port. Says it finished. Allow inbound traffic. Right, should be allowing it. Keep trying the curl. Again, the firewall rules take a few moments before they're actually in effect. There we go. We got something. Let's go back to the web page. There we go. Welcome to Nginx. So this is the welcome page to the Nginx web server. So we did, in fact, install it properly. Yay! All right, and that is managing the VMs. Summary and cleanup. Yep. So there is some cleanup. There's some additional information with regards to the Azure CLI and the command line reference, and then some check your knowledge. Let's see. Suppose you're the administrator of several Azure virtual machines. You get a text message indicating some problems with your VMs. Okay. You're at a friend's house and have your tablet with you. True or false, you'll still be able to access the Azure CLI using the tablet, even though you can't install the CLI on it. I'm going to assume true, just because it's a web page. But I guess we'll find out. I don't know if it specifically said that earlier on or not. Suppose you have a script to create several VMs with different images. When the script issues the command to create the first VM, you do not want to block the script while the VM is being created. Okay. So basically, there's multiple machines we want to create. We don't want everything to wait for the first one to create before you get onto the second one. Instead, you want the script to immediately move on to the next command. What is the best way to do this? And here's our various options. We've got an --async. Use the ampersand to run it in the background, or use the --no wait. I'm going to go with the no wait option. Async is used in some like PowerShell commands. The ampersand is used in some Linux commands, but the no wait is specifically mentioned that one. So I'm going to go with that one. And then most Azure commands return JSON by default. Sometimes this data can be very large, which makes it difficult to read and tricky for the result, tricky to use the results of one command as the input of another. What can you use with the Azure CLI to filter the results only to get the data you need? That would be the query argument, and that was with the GMES path formatting. All right, let's check them. Did I get it right? Looks like I got it right. All right. And that was managing our virtual machines using the Azure CLI.